A woman called Sarah brought a furry creature to a pet groomer. She told the groomer, called James, that it was a cat and needed to be groomed. James, not suspecting anything, took the creature and began to groom it. As he was cutting the creature's fur, he was shocked to discover that it was not a cat at all. The groomer turned pale and asked the woman, "Is this what I think it is?" But what did Sarah bring to the groomer, and where did she find the creature? Welcome to Wonderbot Animals. As James brushed the cat's hair, he began to grow suspicious. There were some characteristics of this creature that didn't line up with the characteristics of a cat. But he pushed his thoughts aside and continued grooming, or at least he tried, because something caught his eye that he couldn't ignore. As he groomed the cat, the thought of it not being a cat grew more and more in the back of his mind. So the groomer decided to ask Sarah a few standard questions everyone with a cat should know. But when Sarah failed to answer the questions correctly, he knew something was up. Suddenly, the energy in the room shifted, and Sarah began to look very nervous. She could probably sense the groomer's suspicion, so the groomer asked her one final question. "Where did you find this creature?" But Sarah's answer shocked him. But what did Sarah bring to the groomer, and where did she find the creature? Sarah had always loved exploring the forest that surrounded her small village. She had lived there her entire life and knew every inch of the dense, tangled wilderness like the back of her hand. But today, she decided to take a new route that would lead to her discovery of the cat. Despite her extensive knowledge of the forest, Sarah was always on the lookout for new and interesting creatures to discover. She had a particular love for wild animals, and she spent much of her free time studying them and learning about their habits and behaviors. But nothing could have prepared her for what she would find today. After walking this new route, Sarah came across a small cave hidden among the trees. It was a place she had never noticed before, and it seemed to call out to her with a sense of mystery and adventure. She simply had this odd feeling that she should check inside it, so she did. Without hesitation, Sarah made her way into the cave, her curiosity piqued by the unknown. The cave was dark and cold, but that didn't matter. She had always loved to explore and discover new things, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. She was just moments away when she encountered something very unusual. As Sarah made her way deeper into the cave, she began to feel a sense of unease wash over her. The air was cool and musty, and the darkness seemed to press in on her from all sides. But despite her growing sense of dread, Sarah refused to turn back. She was determined to see what lay at the heart of the cave. As she pushed on, Sarah finally reached a large chamber at the cave's center. She was quite overwhelmed by the idea that this cave would be this big. She had never been into a cave like this, which impressed her. But not much later, this feeling would turn into fear. When Sarah walked further, she suddenly stumbled upon this strange and peculiar-looking animal and was immediately intrigued. The creature had a long, snout-like nose, a shaggy fur coat, and large, floppy ears that seemed to flop in every direction. It was unlike any animal Sarah had ever seen, and she knew that she had to get a closer look. Despite the creature's creepy eyes, Sarah could see that it was friendly and harmless when getting closer, and she felt a sudden surge of affection for the animal. She knew that she had to help it, but how? It seemed like a harmless cat, but she wasn't sure of it and hoped she wasn't in danger here. As she carefully approached the animal, Sarah could see the devastating state it was in. It was covered in dirt and mud, and its fur was matted and tangled. It seemed to be in need of some help, and Sarah knew that she had to do something to help it. Sarah gently and carefully scooped the animal up in her arms and carried it back to her home. The animal was not afraid and allowed Sarah to pick it up with ease. Sarah walked out of the cave, but as soon as the cat came into the sunlight, something strange happened. Panicked by the sunlight, the helpless animal jumped out of Sarah's arms and sprinted back into the cave. Sarah didn't think twice before running after the animal. However, she soon realized it had stopped and hid in a corner. She gently picked it up and slowly went back outside, step by step, so that little by little, the pitiful creature would get used to the sunlight. Fortunately, the animal eventually adapted to the sunlight. Now that Sarah could see the animal even better, she was genuinely unsure whether it was a cat or not. She had a strong suspicion while in the cave, but now that she was outside, she seriously doubts that. She ultimately chose to bring it home. As she walked through the village with the creature in tow, people stopped and stared in amazement at the strange-looking creature. Some even asked her if it was a cat, but Sarah just smiled and shrugged her shoulders, not wanting to give away the animal's true identity. Sarah didn't even know this. When Sarah arrived home, she carefully placed the animal on a soft blanket and set to work grooming it. She spent hours carefully combing its fur and washing away the dirt and mud covering its body. As she worked, the animal began to look more and more like the beautiful and exotic creature it truly was. Finally, after several hours of grooming, Sarah was finished, and the animal looked absolutely stunning. Its fur was soft and shiny, and it had a look of contentment on its face that Sarah had never seen before. She quickly grabbed her laptop to find out what kind of animal she had taken to her home. She opened her laptop and began frantically looking for pictures of animals that looked like the one she had found in the cave. She searched online for several hours without yielding any results, so she had to think of another method she could use to determine what kind of animal this was. Sarah knew she had to find a way to show the world this amazing and rare creature she had discovered in the forest, so she decided to take it to a local cat groomer to see what they would make of it. She searched for cat groomers on the internet and called the one nearby. Sarah quickly got into the car and rushed to the cat groomer. She noticed that it was very busy on the way, but this did not make her stop as she quickly made all those cars catch up. She was just too excited about what this beautiful animal could be. As Sarah confidently walked into the groomer's shop with the animal in tow, the groomers were absolutely amazed by the creature's beauty and unique appearance. They had never seen anything like it before, and they were eager to learn more about it. But the outcome would surprise all of them. After much questioning and investigation, the groomer finally realized that the animal was not a cat after all. Sarah could tell by the cat groomer's look that he clearly had a lot of questions racing through his mind, and when he looked at Sarah, Sarah knew that something could be wrong. As they began to question Sarah about the animal, they began to suspect it was something more than just a strange-looking cat. And after Sarah failed to answer some of their questions as they expected, they called the police, and before long, a team of officers arrived on the scene. The police were just as amazed by the creature as the groomers had been, and they quickly began to investigate. They ran tests and consulted with experts, trying to determine the animal's true identity. Sarah somehow felt sorry for the little animal that the police were doing all the testing on him. As she waited in the shop for the creature to be groomed, Sarah heard a loud noise and turned to see the creature escaping through an open window. She immediately realized that something was wrong and the creature was in danger. Determined to help the animal, Sarah set out to find it. Sarah hoped the police would assist her in the search, but when she approached the officers, they refused to provide any information or assistance. They looked with stern faces at Sarah, and she was left on her own to track down the creature. So she returned to the only place the animal would return to. Sarah returned to the forest and searched for hours, following tracks and scanning the trees for any sign of the creature. Sarah felt helpless as she couldn't find any trace of the creature. She assumed it would be in complete fear after the police ran all these tests on him. As the sun began to set, Sarah started to lose hope. She had been searching for so long and she still hadn't found any sign of the creature. But just when she was about to turn back and go home, she heard a faint rustling in the bushes. Could that be? She froze, listening intently, and then she saw a flash of movement from the corner of her eye. Sarah's heart raced as she followed the movement, carefully making her way through the underbrush on her hands and knees. But when she finally saw the creature again, she couldn't believe her eyes. Sarah saw the creature huddled in a small clearing with a litter of newborn babies. She knew the police would probably find the animal and its babies, and she couldn't bear the thought of them being taken away or harmed. So, she made the difficult decision to take the creature and its babies back to her home, where she could protect them. Once Sarah arrived home, she saw that several police officers were standing in front of her house. She thought this was very crazy, but she had to find a way to get the little creatures into her house without being seen. After some thinking, she came up with the perfect idea. Sarah decided to park her car some distance away from her house and walk to the back of the garden. There were no police officers there, so she could safely enter through the back door. Eventually, Sarah managed to get into her house unseen. But sadly, this was only short-term. At first, everything seemed to be going well. Sarah worked tirelessly to feed and care for the creatures, and they soon began to thrive under her care. But as the night fell, the creatures became more active and made more noise. Sarah didn't know what to do because the officers were still in front of her house. Then Sarah heard a knock at the door. "Oh no," she thought. She opened it to find a group of police officers standing outside. They told her that they had received a report of loud noises coming from her house and they needed to come in and investigate the noise. Sarah tried to hold them off, but the officers were determined to enter her house. They pushed past her and went inside, where they were shocked to see the multiple creatures huddled together that Sarah had been hiding in her home. Sarah knew that she would be in problems now. Sarah was shocked and confused and didn't know what to do. She tried to protest, but the officers were insistent, and they escorted her out of her house and into a police car. As she walked to the police car, she looked over her shoulder and almost cried at what she saw. Sarah saw multiple police officers aggressively grabbing the creatures. It was without any mercy, and Sarah just couldn't understand why the police were cruel to those tiny creatures. She squinted her eyes shut and yelled at them to be careful, but they didn't listen. It was so sad to see. As they drove to the police station, Sarah's mind raced. She thought of all the different scenarios those creatures would be put through. However, her own situation also didn't look that great. She nearly forgot that she was being arrested. Where were they taking her? Will she end up in jail? Everyone appeared to know the situation once Sarah got to the police station. Everyone appeared to be very angry with her, as she could clearly see the disgust on everyone's faces. They all behaved as if she was some sort of criminal. Sarah was then immediately put into an interrogation room. She sat there for what seemed like hours, wondering what would happen next. Finally, 2 police detectives entered the room and immediately began to question her. But Sarah wasn't so easy to break. She refused to answer any of the detectives' questions and instead demanded to speak with her lawyer. The police detectives began to employ an aggressive technique with her, which they thought could pressure Sarah. But Sarah just thought it was crazy that she was really being treated like this. But she knew she had to be careful here. Everything she said to them may be used against her. Sarah felt scared by the idea that she could be in trouble and maybe could be thrown into jail. The detective tried to intimidate Sarah, but she remained calm and refused to speak. She knew that she had the right to remain silent and she wasn't going to say anything until she had legal representation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah's lawyer arrived, and Sarah hoped that this interrogation horror would soon come to an end. With her lawyer by her side, Sarah explained the entire situation to the officers and, after a while, had the perfect approach and said, "Let me do the talking." The lawyer calmed Sarah down and promised her she won't end up in jail. He said that she didn't do anything wrong there. Sarah didn't break any law. The police want to frighten Sarah to get some information out of her. Then the lawyer called the police detectives back into the room. Police officers came back in and the lawyer did all the talking. After a while, the police officers agreed with him and couldn't keep her in the police station. Sarah felt relieved that she was finally able to go, but she still wanted to know what kind of creature she had found and what would happen to them. Sarah tried to explain that she only had the creature's best interest in mind and only wanted to help the creature. She really wanted to help them and don't let them end up being these experimental animals. "That's animal abuse," she said. Then the officers looked at her and said, "Okay, we'll tell you." However, First, she had to sign a secret contract that stated she wouldn't tell anyone about anything she would learn today. Sarah agreed to this condition, and the police detectives handed over the contract. Sarah signed the entire document without reading it. She just wanted to know the truth. The officers were about to tell Sarah everything when suddenly another officer came in and said that one of the little creatures was not doing well. The agents got up right away, and seeing that Sarah was allowed to know everything, she was allowed to follow the agents to the other room. As they were walking, the agent indicated that it was about an exceptional breed of cat that occurred in prehistoric mankind. That's why it was so special that it still existed, because they had been looking for it for decades. Sarah already had a feeling that it was a very special breed. Once arrived at the room, Sarah finally saw the tiny creatures again. One of the officers said it was a false alarm, and luckily they were all doing well. They were all healthy, as was the adult mother. Sarah didn't really dare ask, but she did anyway. "Can I take them home?" In the end, Sarah was released and allowed to keep the creatures on the condition that she find new homes for them as soon as possible. She was grateful to be able to keep the animals that she loved so much, and she worked hard to find them all new homes where they would be well cared for and loved.